A local news anchor's voice filled my living room, a cheerful veneer over a story of utter theft. My son-in-law, Brian, smiled smugly from the screen. "It's about moving forward," he said to a reporter, "bringing old ideas into the modern age for an $8 million deal with Omnicorp." The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly crafted insult. He was talking about my ideas, my life's work, my patents. He was taking credit for every last one of them on the 7 o'clock news. Beside me on the couch, Brian let out a short, triumphant laugh. "See, Zeke? Told you it was for the best. You're set for life." He nudged my daughter, who offered a weak, complicit smile. The sound of his laughter was worse than the theft itself. It was the sound of mockery, of pity for the old man he thought he'd so cleverly outmaneuvered. He saw me not as a father-in-law, but as a resource that had been fully and finally tapped. His victory felt absolute. On the television, a graphic flashed displaying a heavily redacted licensing agreement bearing the Omnicorp logo. The $8 million figure was highlighted in a bold, garish font. The anchor praised Brian's visionary entrepreneurship. In my own home, I felt the weight of their gazes, Brian's full of arrogant pride, and my daughter's, a cocktail of guilt and rationalization. They were waiting for me to break, to rage, to show them the defeat they expected. I was completely and utterly cornered, a prop in their success story. But I remained perfectly still, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I looked from Brian's triumphant face on the screen to the real one sitting beside me. A small, unreadable smile touched my lips. I held his gaze until his own confident smirk began to waver. In the sudden quiet of the room, the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall seemed to grow louder, each tick a hammer blow against the silence. It was a sound he never truly paid attention to. Brian's smile finally vanished. "Dad, is there something you want to say?" The air grew thick with unspoken words, with the tension of a trap about to spring. I let the silence stretch, savoring his flicker of doubt, the first crack in his perfect facade. I held the moment, then let it go. But months earlier, it all began in my workshop, the one place I still felt like myself, the one place he thought was filled with nothing but junk. My workshop has always been my sanctuary. Even now, the familiar scent of solder, aging paper schematics, and ozone from the old oscilloscope grounds me. The low hum of the ventilation fan is a constant companion. For 50 years, these four walls have been my canvas. Here, I wasn't just Zeke, the quiet widower. I was an engineer, an inventor. My hands, though spotted with age, could still coax life into dormant circuits and bring complex mechanical ideas from my mind into the world. Brian strode in one afternoon, his polished Italian shoes scuffing dust on the concrete floor. He looked around with that familiar, patronizing air. "Zeke, still tinkering with these old toys?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "We need to talk about finances. The upkeep on this house, it's a serious drain. My business needs capital, and frankly, we can't afford to subsidize your hobbies anymore." He made my life work sound like a child's collection of model trains. The insult was deliberate. His eyes scanned the cluttered walls and landed on a simple, dark wood frame. "You should really take that down," he said, gesturing with his chin. "It was my first patent certificate. U.S. Patent 3,881,999. What's that even for? Some motor from the 70s? He scoffed, a dismissive flick of his hand. "It's just collecting dust, a relic. Sentimental value doesn't pay the bill, Zeke." He saw a piece of paper. He had no idea he was looking at his own undoing. The cruelty of his dismissal sent a sharp, painful memory through me. I remembered a much younger Brian, not long after he married my daughter, standing in this very spot. His eyes, then, were wide with genuine admiration as he looked at that same framed patent. "You actually invented this, Zeke? That's incredible. You're a true genius." The man who said those words was gone, replaced by this hollow-eyed vulture who saw only dollar signs where a soul used to be. The betrayal was staggering. Brian slapped a folder onto my workbench, scattering a handful of resistors. "The property taxes are due. We're looking at a $12,500 bill. The roof needs work. The boiler is on its last legs. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My company is on the verge of a major breakthrough, but we're in a cash crunch. We need to leverage all available assets. He looked around my workshop, and I knew he considered everything in it, including me, his asset. A few nights later, I was balancing my checkbook, tighter than I'd like, but far from destitute, when I overheard my daughter's hushed voice on the phone. I don't know, Brian, she was saying in the kitchen. He trusts you. Taking control of his accounts feels wrong. A long pause followed, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator. I know we need the money, but this is his entire life savings. What if something goes wrong? Her protest was a feather against a hurricane. The next day, a thick envelope arrived. It was from a financial advisor Brian had hired on my behalf. The letter recommended consolidating all my assets, including the intellectual property rights to my patents, into a new, streamlined family trust. For ease of management and tax purposes, it read. A single line in the fine print made my heart stop. Brian was to be named the sole, discretionary trustee. He would have total control. This wasn't protection. It was a cage. They presented the trust documents to me over a tense dinner. My daughter avoided my eyes, focusing on cutting her pot roast into meticulously small pieces. It's just a formality, Dad, she murmured. It makes it easier for us to help you. Brian chimed in, his voice as smooth as oil. It protects your legacy, Zeke. All your inventions, all your hard work. We're securing it for the future. He was securing it all right. For himself. In the sterile silence of the dining room, I thought of Hannah. She had passed 5 years ago, but her wisdom was a constant presence. I remembered her sitting with me in the workshop late one night, her hand on my arm. Be careful, Zeke, she'd said. Your mind is a treasure, but not everyone sees the gold. Some people just see the box it comes in, and they want the box. I was beginning to understand just how right she was. Ryan slid a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen across the polished oak table. It came to a stop just before my plate. We need this signed by Friday, he stated, the politeness in his tone barely concealing the command beneath. The bank has some strict deadlines for setting up the account structure and finalizing the asset transfer. The manufactured urgency was a classic tactic, a ticking clock designed to rush me into a decision, to prevent me from asking questions or seeking a second opinion. I pushed the pen back. I'd like my lawyer to look at this first, Mr. Abernathy. Brian's face tightened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Abernathy? Zeke, the man still uses a fax machine. This is modern estate planning, far beyond his scope. My guy is the best in the city, top of his field. He leaned back, exuding a condescending confidence. Let's not waste time and money bringing a dinosaur up to speed on this, okay? At a family barbecue that weekend, Brian turned my caution into a public joke. Raising his beer, he announced, Here's to Zeke, who's still living in the past, thinks his lawyer from the Stone Age can handle a 21st century trust. A few of my nephews and cousins laughed along with him. I saw the looks they exchanged, pitying glances that categorized me as a confused, stubborn old man who was getting in the way of progress. The humiliation was a physical weight. My own daughter offered a nervous little laugh. Oh, Dad, just careful. That's all, she said to the group. But her words didn't defend me. They reinforced the narrative Brian was building, that I was feeble, out of touch, and in need of management. In that moment, watching her smile weakly at her husband's joke, I saw her make a choice. She chose the promise of wealth and status he offered, over loyalty to her own father. It was a quiet, devastating betrayal. Later, as I was clearing plates, Brian cornered me by the grill. The friendly facade was gone. His voice was low and cold. Sign the papers, Zeke. Don't make this difficult. He paused, letting the threat settle. If you don't, we'll have to explore other options. Power of attorney, competency hearings. It can get very ugly, very fast. You don't want strangers making decisions for you, do you? The velvet glove was off. This was extortion. That night, I lay awake in bed, the house silent except for the grandfather clock in the hall. Its familiar, rhythmic ticking had been a comfort for 50 years, a steady heartbeat in the home Hannah and I had built. But now, It sounded different. It was no longer a companion. It was a countdown timer. Each tick marking a second lost, a second closer to my own erasure, to the moment my life would no longer be my own. Ignoring Brian's warnings, I secretly made a copy of the trust document and couriered it to Mr. Abernathy. I called him the next day. Despite his age, his mind was a steel trap. "Zeke, this is highway robbery dressed up in legal jargon," he'd rasped over the phone. "A discretionary trust with a sole trustee who stands to benefit directly from your assets. No court would uphold this if challenged. Don't you dare sign a thing." For the first time in weeks, a sliver of hope cut through the dread. The hope lasted exactly 48 hours. My phone rang. It was Abernathy's secretary, her voice strained. "Mr. Henderson, I am so sorry to tell you this. Mr. Abernathy suffered a massive stroke last night. He's been hospitalized and is unresponsive." The line went quiet. My one lifeline, my only ally, was gone. The timing was too precise to be a coincidence. Brian must have found out I'd contacted him. He had isolated me completely. The crushing defeat was absolute. A week later, I sat at the dining room table and signed the papers. My hand felt like it belonged to someone else. As I pushed the stack of documents back across the table, Brian placed a hand on my shoulder. The gesture, meant to look like one of comfort, felt like the lead weight of a tombstone. "You did the right thing, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Now we can take care of everything." I felt hollow, a ghost in my own home. Months drifted by in a haze of forced family dinners and condescending updates on my portfolio. Then came that Tuesday night, 7:20 p.m. I was half watching television when a sleek, futuristic commercial appeared. A new smart home system called Aura Home. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat. The core of their system, a self-regulating power distributor that learned a home's energy patterns. The design was mine. It was patent 6,114,778. I had the schematics in a drawer not 20 feet away. My blood ran cold. The commercial ended, and the local evening news broadcast began. And in our top story, the anchor announced cheerfully, "A major victory for local innovation." My son-in-law's smug face filled the screen. Tech entrepreneur Brian Croft has just sealed an $8 million deal with industry giant Omnicorp for his revolutionary Aura Home technology. And in that instant, everything clicked into place. The trust, the pressure, the lies. It was all for this. He hadn't just taken my money. He had stolen my very identity. The camera cut to a shot of Brian standing in front of an Omnicorp building, flanked by executives in sharp suits. He was shaking hands, beaming. He was just sitting on them. "They were collecting dust," Brian said in a soundbite, a phrase clearly meant for me. "We made them useful. We modernized them for a new generation." He was painting me as a relic, a doddering old fool, incapable of seeing the value in my own creations, a justification for his grand theft. The betrayal was now public. A living room was silent after the broadcast ended, save for the incessant ticking of the grandfather clock. Brian stood up, stretching as if he'd just finished a light workout. "Well, there you have it," he said, unable to keep the glee out of his voice. He glanced at me, finally acknowledging my presence. "It's a huge win for the family, Zeke. We're all rich." He framed his crime as a shared victory, a kindness he had bestowed upon me. That night, I walked into my workshop. The familiar smells of solder and dust felt alien, tainted. My gaze fell upon a framed patent on the wall, U.S. Patent 388199, the one he dismissed as a worthless relic. I ran my fingers over the glass, the smooth, cool surface a stark contrast to the turmoil in my chest. He thought this piece of paper was a trophy from a bygone era. It was a symbol of my profound loss, a testament to a life's work that had been stolen and sold for parts. A new deadline was now seared into my brain, the official product launch. Omnicorp announced the Aura Home system would hit the market in 1 month. That was my ticking clock. Once their product was integrated into the national retail chain, the legal battle would become exponentially more complex and expensive. My window for action was small and closing fast. Despair began to set in, a cold, heavy blanket. I felt utterly powerless against the corporate machine Brian had unleashed. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. In the dead of night, I found myself pacing the quiet house. Passing my daughter and Brian's closed bedroom door, I heard hushed, tense voices. I stopped, pressing my ear against the cool wood. It was my daughter. "Brian, are you sure about this? What if he finds a lawyer? The original patents are in his name." I heard him sigh, a sound of pure exasperation. The quiet dread in her voice told me she knew, deep down, this was a crime. "Don't worry about it." Brian's voice was a low, confident murmur. "The trust gives me full control of all intellectual property. His name on the patents is just a historical footnote now. Legally, they're mine to license as I see fit. He signed the rights away, fair and square. There's nothing he can do." But chilling finality in his tone was the sound of a coffin lid shutting. He believed he had constructed the perfect, legally airtight theft. He had accounted for everything, except for one thing. His words echoed in my mind. His name on the patents is just a historical footnote. I returned to the workshop, a sudden, frantic energy coursing through me. I pulled the old patent certificate from the law, the wood frame creaking in protest. My hands trembled as I undid the tabs on the back and carefully slid the thick, yellowed paper out from behind the glass. It wasn't just my name on the document. It was something else. Something I had done 40 years ago, on Hannah's advice. Under the harsh light of my desk lamp, I read the crucial line, my eyes tracing the faded type. "Assignee," it read. Not Zeke Henderson. It said, "Henderson Innovations, LLC." It was a holding company Hannah had insisted I create decades ago. "To protect your work from the world, and sometimes from family," she had said. Her words a quiet premonition. The patents belonged to a legal entity, not to me as an individual, and I was the sole officer of that LLC. The trust documents Brian had me sign gave him control over my personal assets. He had made a fatal, arrogant assumption that I and my inventions were one and the same, but legally, they were not. Henderson Innovations, LLC was a separate entity, a silent legal fortress he didn't even know existed. He had stolen the keys to my house, but he had no idea my treasure was buried in a vault across town. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the first real smile in months. My next step had to be precise. The Omnicorp launch was in 28 days. I spent the next morning at the county clerk's office, my hands smelling of old paper and dust, a scent that was now one of hope. For a nominal fee, I obtained a certified copy of Brian's business registration for Croft Innovations. As I suspected, in his haste and arrogance, he had registered it as a simple sole proprietorship. The owner was listed as one person, Brian Croft. No shell corporations, no layers of protection, a direct, traceable link. Armed with this knowledge, I didn't search for a local, aging lawyer. I went online and found a patent attorney in the city, a shark named Ms. Evelyn Reed, known for her aggressive litigation against corporate giants. I scheduled a video consultation for the following afternoon. I laid out the documents on my desk, the LLC formation papers, the patent assignments, Brian's business registration, and a recording of the Omnicorp news broadcast. I was preparing for war. Miss Reed appeared on my computer screen, sharp, professional, and radiating an intensity that was almost frightening. She listened without interruption as I laid out the entire story, her eyes scanning the documents I held up to the camera. When I finished, a predatory grin spread across her face. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice like cracking ice, "your son-in-law hasn't just committed fraud. He's committed willful patent infringement against a corporate entity. The damages for that are triple." She continued, laying out the strategy. Omnicorp is a publicly traded company. The last thing they want is a massive lawsuit for patent infringement days before a major product launch. Their legal department will have a heart attack. They will cut your son-in-law loose so fast his head will spin. We're not just going after him. We're going after the $8 million deal itself. The plan was beautiful in its brutal simplicity. We weren't just suing. We were ambushing. I paid her retainer using a credit card Brian didn't know I had. The first step was a cease and desist letter sent directly to Omnicorp's general counsel, along with a draft of the lawsuit we were prepared to file. The letter would cite the patent numbers, the ownership by Henderson Innovations LLC, and the clear infringement. We would also send a copy to Brian. It was designed to create maximum chaos and panic, turning his partners into his enemies overnight. A few days later, Brian burst into the house, his face a mask of fury. He was wielding a piece of paper in his hand, the letter from Ms. Reed. "What the hell is this, Zeke?" he roared, his voice echoing through the quiet home. "Henderson Innovations LLC? What is this garbage? You're trying to sabotage me." He was genuinely bewildered, his mind unable to process a variable he hadn't planned for. His perfect airtight trap had a hole in it he never saw. I met his rage with calm silence, simply sipping my tea. "It's a legal entity I formed a long time ago, Brian. It owns the patents. It always has." His face went from red to a sickly pale as the implication sank in. "The trust," he stammered. "The trust gives me control." I shook my head slowly. "The trust gives you control of my personal assets. The LLC is not a personal asset. It's a corporation. And you have infringed upon its intellectual property." My daughter ran into the room, drawn by the shouting. "Brian, what's wrong?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear. Brian threw the letter on the table. "Your father is trying to ruin us. He set up some kind of secret company. Omnicorp called. They're freezing the deal pending a legal review." His voice cracked on the last few words. The foundation of his new empire, built on my life's work, was crumbling before his eyes. I remembered Hannah again, her steadying presence a balm. "Build your house on stone, Zeke," she'd always told me when looking over my schematics. "A clever design is worthless on a weak foundation." Brian had built his house on sand, on the arrogant assumption that an old man was a simple creature, easily dismantled and catalogued. He never considered the possibility of a hidden architecture, a foundation laid in stone 40 years ago by a woman who saw the world more clearly than anyone. The phone rang constantly for the next few days. First, it was Omnicorp's lawyers, their tone shifting from aggressive to conciliatory once Miss Reed provided them with the LLC's articles of incorporation and the original patent assignment deeds. Then came the frantic calls from Brian's own lawyer, a man clearly out of his depth. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was no longer a countdown to my doom. It was now ticking for Brian. Miss Reed called with an update. "Omnicorp wants to settle. They've already terminated their licensing agreement with Croft Innovations. They're offering to make a new deal directly with Henderson Innovations LLC, and they are prepared to be very generous to make this go away quietly before the launch." The speed of his downfall was breathtaking. The corporate giant he had aligned himself with had cast him aside the moment he became a liability. That evening, my daughter found me in the workshop. Her face was tear-streaked, her voice trembling. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. I trusted him." She looked around at the schematics, the prototypes, the tools of my life. "He said we were helping you, securing your legacy." I said nothing. Her apology was not for me. It was for herself, an attempt to ease the guilt of her own complicity. I offered her no comfort. The final insult came a week before the settlement was to be finalized. Brian approached me in the garden, his arrogance replaced by a desperate, cloying humility. "Zeke, we can work this out," he pleaded. "Just the two of us. Cut out the lawyers. I'll give you a piece of the Omnicorp deal, a generous piece, more than you could ever spend. You don't have to do this." He still saw it as a negotiation, a simple matter of money, completely oblivious to the depth of his transgression. He took a final, greedy shot. "Think about your daughter, your grandchildren. This will destroy the family." He was using them as a shield, his last pathetic gambit. "You've already made your point." I looked at him, at the man who had admired my genius before deciding to steal it, who had called my life's work dusty relics. He believed a performance of remorse could undo the damage. He was wrong. The trap wasn't just set, it was already sprung. The settlement meeting took place at Miss Reed's downtown office. The Omnicorp legal team was there, as was Brian, looking small and defeated. My daughter sat beside him, looking at her hands. The final document was a service agreement, a new licensing deal between Omnicorp and Henderson Innovations LLC. It granted them the rights to use my pens in exchange for an upfront payment and a significant percentage of ongoing royalties. The numbers were staggering, far exceeding the original $8 million. There was a second document, a personal one. It was a release form for Brian to sign, absolving him of further legal action from my LLC, in exchange for him dissolving his company and relinquishing any and all claims to the trust he had created. He would walk away with nothing but the debts he'd incurred. Ms. Reed slid the papers across the polished mahogany table toward me. The reversal was complete. The power had shifted entirely. Brian stared at the documents, his face ashen. He looked up at me, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Zeke, please, don't do this." His voice was barely a whisper. All the swagger and condescension were gone, stripped away to reveal the terrified, greedy man beneath. He wasn't pleading for forgiveness. He was pleading for his financial life. He had built his world on my foundation, and now that I was taking it back, he had nothing left to stand on. My daughter finally looked up from her hands, her eyes locking with mine. Daddy. The word, one she hadn't used in years, was a fragile, desperate bridge thrown across a chasm of her own making. It was a plea for a return to a time before this, a time when family meant trust, not transactions. But some things, once broken, cannot be pieced back together in the same shape. Her betrayal had a price, and that price was the silence I now offered her. I ignored them both. My focus was on the documents, on the crisp black ink against the heavy bond paper. Miss Reed tapped the gold pen on the signature line of the service agreement. "Mr. Henderson," she prompted gently. The room was utterly silent, a vacuum of tension. The only sound was the faint hum of the city traffic through the thick plate glass window, a world away from the quiet ticking of my grandfather clock, which had marked the beginning of this sordid affair. I thought back to the night on the news, in my own living room, the humiliation, the smug laughter, the public declaration of my obsolescence. This polished boardroom was a world away from that cozy space, but it was the true arena. The public spectacle he had created to celebrate his victory had now been replaced by this private, sterile execution of his defeat. There were no cameras here, no reporters, just the quiet, brutal efficiency of the law. The memory of Brian's words, he was just sitting on them. They were collecting dust. We made them useful, flash in my mind. It was the ultimate justification of a thief, cloaking greed in the language of progress. He hadn't seen innovation, he'd seen inventory. He hadn't seen a lifetime of passion, he'd seen an underperforming asset. The cold calculus of his betrayal was what I could not and would not forgive. It was a sin against the very spirit of creation. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy, substantial in my hand. I looked at the first document, the Omnicorp service agreement. I could see the future it laid out. My inventions finally being used, my legacy secured, but on my own terms. The wealth it would generate was secondary. The primary victory was the reclamation of my identity, the proof that my mind was not a dusty relic to be pillaged, but a fountainhead that was still very much alive. Then I looked at the second document, the one that would sever Brian from my life and my work forever. It was a legal instrument of banishment. By signing it, he would admit his defeat and vanish from the equation. He would become what he had tried to make me, a historical footnote in a story that was now, once again, my own. The symmetry was harsh, but it was just. It was the closing of a painful, necessary circle. Brian made one last, desperate sound, a choked gasp, as the nib of my pen touched the paper. My daughter squeezed her eyes shut. They both knew this was the end. There were no more negotiations, no more appeals to a family bond they themselves had shattered. There was only the quiet scratch of pen on paper, a sound that sealed their fate and finalized my victory. The ticking clock that had haunted me for months had finally struck its final chime. I signed the Omnicorp agreement first, my signature clear and steady. Then I slid the document for Brian across the table. His hand trembled as he reached for the pen. He didn't read it, he just signed, his movements jerky and defeated. He had lost completely. He had gambled everything on my perceived weakness, and in doing so, had revealed his own. He was nothing without my ideas, a hollow shell of ambition. After signing, Brian didn't look at me. He looked at my daughter, a silent, accusatory stare that said, "This is your fault too." She flinched, pulling away from him as if his touch might burn her. In that moment, the final fracture in their alliance appeared. Their partnership, built on a foundation of shared greed and deceit, could not withstand the weight of failure. They would now have to live with the consequences, and with each other. Miss Reed gathered the signed documents, her expression professionally neutral, but I could see a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. Omnicorp will wire the initial payment to the LLC's account within 24 hours, she stated, her voice crisp. Mr. Croth, you will receive confirmation of your trust's dissolution by the end of the week. It was over. The legal mechanisms were in motion, unstoppable and irreversible. The machine he had tried to use against me was now working perfectly in my favor. I stood up from the table. I didn't offer a handshake or a parting word. I gave them nothing. No anger, no pity, no acknowledgement. To do so would be to engage with them, to suggest that there was still some connection between us worth addressing. Instead, I treated them as they had treated me, as an irrelevance, a piece of the past that was no longer useful. I turned my back on them and walked toward the door. As I reached the door, my daughter's voice, small and broken, called out one last time. "Dad, where will you go?" The question was absurd. It implied I was the one who was lost, the one who was being displaced. I paused for a moment, my hand on the cool metal of the door handle, but I did not turn around. I was not going anywhere. I was already home. It was they who were adrift, cast out from the life they had tried to steal. I walked out of the law office and into the bright afternoon sun. The city noise, once a source of anxiety, now felt vibrant and full of possibility. I felt lighter than I had in years, as if a physical weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The future was no longer a dwindling road, but an open horizon. The patents, my life's work, were not an ending. They were a new beginning, powered by the very same mind Brian had so foolishly underestimated. Back at the house, I walked into the living room. It was empty. Brian and my daughter were gone. A palpable silence had replaced the suffocating tension that had filled the air for months. The only sound was the steady, familiar tick-tock of the grandfather clock. It no longer sounded like a countdown or a judgment. It sounded like a heartbeat. The calm, steady and enduring heartbeat of my home, which was now truly mine again. I went into my workshop. The scent of solder and ozone was no longer tainted with betrayal. It was the smell of sanctuary once more. My eyes fell on the empty space on the wall where the framed patent had hung. It was no longer needed as a symbol of loss or a hidden weapon. Its job was done. The real legacy wasn't in the frame. It was in the schematics on my desk, the half-finished prototypes on the shelves, and the new ideas already taking shape in my mind. I picked up a soldering iron, its tip heating with a faint hiss. A new project lay on my workbench, a complex schematic for a microgenerator I'd been dreaming up. For the first time in a long time, my mind was clear of legal battles and family betrayals. It was free to do what it did best, to build, to create, to innovate. The joy of the work, pure and simple, flowed back into me. It was a feeling I thought I had lost forever. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Miss Reed. Confirmation of wire transfer received. Welcome back to the driver's seat, Mr. Henderson. A simple message, but it contained the weight of my entire victory. I wasn't a passenger in my own life anymore. I wasn't a relic to be managed. I was the engineer, the inventor, the architect of my own future. The control Brian had so desperately craved and so clumsily stolen was now firmly back in my hands. I looked around the workshop, at the tools of my trade, the evidence of a life spent in creation. The betrayal had cost me my daughter, but it had also given me back myself. It had forced me to fight, to remember the strength and cunning that had always been there, beneath the quiet exterior of a retired old man. Brian's mistake was in thinking that because I was old, I was finished. He failed to understand that some engines only run better with age. I picked up my pen, not a lawyer's fountain pen, but my own worn-out ballpoint. I leaned over the new schematic, the clean white paper a landscape of infinite possibility. With a steady hand, I made the first mark, a single, decisive line that brought a new idea one step closer to reality. I did not look back. I just began to build.